Yeah, well,
So we done with the news then, Darren?
Yeah, let's get on. Go on, James. Floor's yours.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just try and share my screen here. I want to try and keep the screen going as well as so I've got some slides, but also I've got lots of stuff to show as well. So hopefully I can do both video and screen sharing and the screen sharing at the same time. Let's see. Here we go.
Yeah, we can still see you.
You can still see me. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just change one other thing here. At any point, obviously, butt in and ask any questions. Actually, first of all, how many people here have got any experience with kegs?
We have.
Yes.
I need it.
Yes.
We have. Yeah.
No. Not at
Okay.
all.
Good. Okay. I mean, I guess just chime in when you've got any hints, tips, anything like that. Because I thought, basically, I bought some kegs about a year ago, just on a slightly tipsy whim. And there's somebody who's selling them, a whole bunch of them, very cheaply. So I went in, bought them all, and ended up with a bunch of kegs. So I've just been sort of over the past year, just been learning to use them properly. Let me just see. That's better. Sorry, just trying to get one right screen up here. There we go. Perfect. Sorry, just trying to get to be able to see my camera so I can see what I'm actually showing you here. So yeah, I spent the last year fiddling around with kegs. So I thought I'd just talk about it a bit, and for anyone else that's interested in the area, some of the tricks I've learned, that sort of thing, really. So, so let's talk about kegging. Why would you keg? The main reason for me was no more bottling days. Much as there's sort of a rite of passage of homebrewing, really, of both cleaning and then filling lots of bottles. But I was getting some poor feedback from my wife about the number of bottles left around the kitchen. And plus I just wasn't really enjoying the bottling days. So that was one reason. The other side of it really for me was that I wanted to try and avoid oxygen in my beer a lot more. I've never really been able to brew any good, really hoppy beers. They've always come out either slightly or very oxidized. I managed to brew one very good double IPA, but it didn't last all that long in the bottles. And I found in general, just sort of brewing these really hoppy beers, a bit like sort of threading the eye of a needle. It's doable, but you've got to get the process all right at the right time to make sure you don't end up with any oxygen exposure on the way or into the bottle. So those really the reasons behind it. I mean, there's some other reasons as well, like you can do bulk lagering and aging when you've got kegs. And also really just pouring from your own tap, like you're in your own pub, is actually quite cool. Quite impressive for friends as well. But as the main reason for me is to get away from bottling. So what are your options for kegs?
What do you mean? But you can get the beer conditioned faster?
Well, basically, because you've got the because you are force carbonating as well as chilling at the same time, you can actually get through that sort of later stage of brewing much faster. So instead of having to get the beer really quite clear before you put it in the bottle, with kegs you can take a little bit of a shortcut, put the beer in when it's slightly not fully fermented perhaps, and I'll talk a bit about that later on. But also then you can do things like, if you want to, you could dry hop in the keg. You can also then chill it and carbonate it at the same time. So you can get to the end point sort of a little bit quicker.
So I've got an example of that. I brewed an American Pale Ale. I brewed it on the Friday, and I was drinking it on the following Saturday.
Yeah,
so that was
turning around beers in one day.
Fermentation, dry hopping, kegging, and carbonation.
You
in
brewed on a Friday and you're drinking on the Saturday.
a week later. So basically, 7 days, 8 days, or whatever it was, I guess, to produce it and then be serving it.
Sessionable beers you can turn around in a week to 10 days if you really want to push it.
That included dry hopping as well. So it was a bit of a rush job, but it worked.
Once I've got a carbonation one that you can carb a beer in like 24 hours and it's ready to drink after that.
Well, under that, if you're prepared to shake it.
Yeah, we'll talk about all of those things in a little bit. So let's get there. So
if you're prepared to shake it, I've just been to the toilet. Sorry about that. I'm back now.
Here we go.
So when we're talking about kegs, what do I mean? Kegs are pressure vessels as distinct from casks that you'd serve real ale in. So primarily they're pressure vessels, need pressure to dispense. You can start with your basic plastic pressure barrel. I had one of those when I started off brewing. I think I've still got one in the loft somewhere. And actually, if you want to do something like a bitter or something like that, I actually think they're a really good way of serving that sort of thing. You will generally naturally carbonate beers in them, so add in some priming sugar and let it carbonate itself. And then you dispense out of it using that carbonation to the pressure that's built up in there. Or you can inject CO2 through some cartridges or an S30 bottle. The other option, you can have a Sankey, which is Sankey kegs, which are the commercial kegs. They are pretty bomb-proof. The only difficulty with them is they are designed for commercial use, and they're quite difficult for homebrewers to clean and inspect internally, because basically there's only a very small, I think it's like a 2-inch opening, might not even be that, to get into it. And so ideally you have to wash the thing using an actual keg washer or a pressure washer through it, a caustic cleaner. So it gets quite tricky. If you want to remove the spear that goes down, which is the dip tube that goes down in it, you need a special tool to remove that as well, because they have safeties on them, so you can't accidentally remove it whilst the keg is pressured, because it will fire the spear up out if you manage to do that. So they tend to be quite expensive as well. Whereas what I'm going to talk about mainly this evening is the Cornelius, the Corny kegs, which are formerly, they were used for pub, bar, soft drinks. They have basically been adopted by home brewers for the ease of use from a homebrew point of view. They're fairly easy to clean. The spares are fairly widely available. They're quite cheap in comparison to Sankey kegs. The only downside with them is that they've got a lot of different seals on them, lots of little rubber seals, and that you need to check quite carefully. Otherwise, they can end up leaking, and that either empties your CO2 bottle or your beer. And the other problem with them is that the lids on them don't seal very well at very low pressures. So if you want to serve beer like a sort of cask bitter or something like that, where you're potentially only using a couple of pounds per square inch of pressure, the lids don't tend to seal very well at that. So I've got one here as a demonstration. So you see here, nice big lid, which you can get into to make it easier to clean. And then on either side here, you've got the posts, which are used for, one is for gas, which is this one here. The other one is for liquid. They look very similar, but actually when you're trying to attach stuff to it, this is the one black disconnect you would use for the actual liquid. Does not go onto the gas one, but it does go nice and easily onto that one. There's actually still a bit of pressure into this keg as well. The other feature it has is in the middle here, we've got a little pressure release valve. So if the keg gets over pressurized, this keg is marked up that it can use for take 100 psi. So around there or a bit above it, the pressure relief valve would start to vent automatically as a safety. Or if you just want to let the pressure out yourself, give it a little pull. And once you've done that, you can then pull this up and open the lid. So you can see in there, nice and easy to get in there to clean it. And also the safety factor is that you can't really open this lid whilst the keg is still pressurized. The other option, which if you are considering doing really low pressure serve, for a much newer, which are these mini kegs. You can get them up to, you can get them 5-10 litres now. This is a 5 litre one. And they have again a pressure release valve on here. They've got the same posts as a Cornelius keg, so you can use the same disconnect, the same gas and everything else. But they seal just with this one just has a screw seal on it. So fairly straightforward. Not as easy to get your hand. You obviously can't get your hand in to clean it, but you can at least see into it quite easily. Obviously, if you undo that lid whilst it's pressurized, this will go flying away. So you need to be careful with that. But if you do want to have a very low pressure dispense for doing a bitter or something like that, it's actually quite good.
Can I just say something here, James?
Yep.
The black seal on the lids is you do need a high pressure, but you can get a red seal that goes round the lid, and they are much softer, so they will take a lower pressure and still keep sealed.
So what Phil is talking about there is the main lid seal here is this black one, which actually seats inside the lid, like so. And then when you, difficult to do this way around, but when you push the levers across, it basically pushes that seal up against the inside of the lid, which is fine. But it needs basically an extra few, at least 5 psi really, to actually properly squash that seal up and make sure it doesn't leak at all. So Phil says you can get instead of this black seal, or sometimes you get white ones, you can get a squishier one which actually seals at much lower pressure, which is another way of doing it. The other thing I've seen people do is put extra shims underneath the feet which hold this in place.
Could I just say that they also make thicker O-rings. Someone makes those O-rings a couple of mil thicker, which also makes a better seal because it causes more pressure when you're actually sealing it. So someone out there is making enlarged, oversized O-rings for that purpose.
Cool.
Nice one.
So the other way is that these little plastic feet here, that you basically push this handle down and it squashes the lid up against the inside of the keg. If you put an extra shim under there as well, that actually pushes it up and seals it a bit tighter. So that's another way potentially to achieve the same thing. So if you're going to do this, what do you need? Actually, the as important as having the kegs is some form of refrigeration, because at least if you're going to force carbonate beer, it definitely needs to have some kind of refrigeration to have that happen. But obviously as well, when it comes to serving, ideally you want it to be cold before you serve it. There are options to have chillers that you can run in line. So I think you've got the Linda's chill in line, I think, and you got
serving.
shelf. Yeah,
Linda chillers.
I've not used either that or a shelf chiller, but there are options there if you want to do it, but they are probably more expensive than having a cheap fridge or a second-hand fridge that you can stick it into. And you will need it for other things, like just for chilling the keg down to help drop out any sediment, and to help with carbonation in the first place. Obviously, the second thing you will need is an actual keg. I'm here talking about the Corny type kegs. Actually, in the UK, I think you'll see more, at least new ones mostly come from the likes of AEB, or a bunch are now made in China. If you're buying second-hand ones, they could have come from all kinds of places. Some will be actual Cornelius kegs made by the Cornelius company, which one I've got down here is. Others will come from, you'll see the big drinks manufacturers like Britvic, I think I've got one from them, and there are others as well. The one thing I would say is that if you're secondhand cornies can be nice and cheap. If you look around, certainly I've seen some which are available even at the moment, I think for about £40. Brand new ones will be up near 80. If you're buying secondhand, the one thing I would say is be wary of who the manufacturer is. The ones which are made by Firestone or John Wood were all made in the USA, and unlike virtually every other form of keg, they have the threads which the posts screw onto here are a slightly odd size, which makes getting replacements for these basically impossible outside the USA. I know because out of that job lot I bought, there was one keg which was a Firestone Challenger, which had one of those odd thread sizes, and it didn't come with the post. And so I couldn't find a post unless I imported one from the USA, which by the time I added on postage, packaging, import charges and everything else, I think I was going to pay £35 for a little keg post, which was more than the keg was worth, frankly. So I ended up just taking out the dip tubes and other bits from it and throwing it away. So whereas if you get most of the ones which are available in the UK, though, you should be able to get replacement posts and replacement everything else for them. It's just something to be aware of. The other bit you'll need is a CO2 cylinder with CO2 in it, which will be drinks or beer gas. Plenty of suppliers around. It will vary as to what the cost is, whether you need to pay a big deposit or not. Where I am, being just outside of where some of the London suppliers are, I ended up having to pay a fairly hefty deposit. I think others, what do other people pay for their gas?
£24.05 for 6.35.
24, yeah, so 24 quid, that's with VAT and everything. And they'll actually deliver for a tenner.
That's the most specific answer I've ever heard.
We just looked it up yesterday because we ran out.
Yeah, one of our cylinders, one of the two cylinders has run out.
How much overall? 36 quid. Was it?
No, you pay a one-off deposit, which is returnable, which is about 40 quid. And then the gas is, say, what,
24.05.
24.05 for 6. So that's a 6.35 kilos. So you're talking about a cylinder which is
19 mil.
So
90 centimetres. 90
centimetres tall.
So how much is that per 330 ml dispense? And don't pretend you haven't worked it out.
I'm trying to think how many gallons of litres it actually puts out. I'm thinking it displaces 500 and something litres or whatever. It lasts forever. And I use it. I use my CO2 for everything. For blanketing, for pushing the beer out of the fermenter at the end. For just topping up kegs and stuff. So, and it lasts for ages.
I think I worked it out, and it was a lot of kegs. It was like 80 or something like that kegs I was going to get through, and that's even with doing purges and things like that. So so it's not a lot once you've got it. But I had to pay a fairly. I got mine from, I think it was Wimbledon Gas, but the deposit was a lot more than that. I can't remember off the top of my head, so I'm not going to say. But
just on that,
I think I paid 7 quid for the bottle. Did you buy the bottle from Wimbledon Gas, or you just renting the?
I think I bought it basically, so I'll get.
Yeah, I think I paid 70. I think I paid 70 quid for the bottle.
Yeah, sounds about right.
I think the last time I filled, which was probably it must be nearly 2 years ago now, it was 20 quid for a fill. But I haven't been brewing very much. So I haven't filled up for a while.
Well, with Adam, we've used Adams, and we buy the bottles, and then they will buy them back if ever we give up drink.
Yeah, so I use Adams as well. So
right.
I think I paid about £70 for the bottle.
Yeah, it was a lot for the bottle, but you get it back. Yeah.
Yeah, and now I pay, because I use the 325 kilo bottle, and I pay about 24 including delivery.
Yeah.
Delivery.
Really?
Mine's £17.50 and £3 a month rental.
There you go.
Has anyone had to refill during the lockdown and had any problems with that, or are they all working as normal?
No, I got a delivery today from London Gases. It's 36 quid, free delivery, and I ordered it at like 10 o'clock last night, and they deliver in the morning, like across London. Yeah, I think that was maybe like 60 or 70 quid to rent. I think you rent the thing, don't you?
No, you pay the deposit. You pay the deposit, so in theory, you're basically buying the bottle, and once you don't want to use it anymore, you get your money.
That's right.
London Gases are weird because you do pay a deposit and you also pay rental, and they take the rental out of your deposit until the deposit is run out, and then you're paying rental. And they all
Rob, it's only for you, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it doesn't.
Only for you, not for the rest of us. Well, not for me anyway. I use London Gas as well, and there's no rental associated with it. But there was a huge hike in cost. About just over a year ago, it was £24 to refill a 6.35 kilo cylinder, and it went up to 36.
Wow.
At the drop of a hat.
Yeah, I've not heard two people with London Gases have the same price.
Well, there's an
nice with them on the phone.
There's an Adams in Dartford that do it for 24 for a 6.35.
Yeah, I tried Adams when I added delivery. It was a little bit more than I could get it from London. It really does depend, I think, where you are and what the delivery charge is.
Yeah, we've got a local Adams place just a few miles away, so we just go and pick
Elton Welding Supplies.
No, our one we use in Kent is Kent Factors. It's a Motor Factors place, but they just do it for welding, I think. Although we get the food grade one, we don't use the welding one.
No, the thing is to have a little look around, isn't there, to see what you can get for where you live.
Yeah, I would suggest getting the food grade one, so the actual drinks gas, because you don't know what else is in the other one, and it's possible. I mean, you want to avoid stuff as well, like having oxygen in there, which would oxidize your drinks.
Some of it uses oil, for like paintball and whatnot.
Oh, lovely. So I would definitely buy the drinks gas. The other side is a CO2 regulator, which you would definitely need. I don't have my actual one here because it's connected to my gas cylinder. I've got a little secondary one here, similar sort of thing. The one I have has 2 gauges on it. That's the one area where I would definitely say don't buy cheap. You can buy these Chinese ones for 20 quid off of eBay, and every time I see a problem online with somebody that has sorry, somebody asking a question?
Was that Peter?
Okay. So every time I've seen a problem online with somebody a regulator, it's inevitably one of the cheapo ones. I would get one from somewhere like ODL, which is fairly, I think the Malt Miller and several other places sell it. Costs a little bit more, about £40, but given that, as you were just saying, your tank of gas can be anything from £20 to £35, when those regulators go, they tend to blow out all the gas. So it's one refill that it will save you, and probably a lot of trouble as well. The other bits you'll need are some disconnects, which I've already shown that go on the posts. So you've got the black ones, either sort of John Guest sort of screw or a barb, which goes straight into the beer line. And then on the other side, you've got the grey ones for gas. Those are fairly straightforward. I haven't heard any sort of serious issues with people having cheap ones of those, but I don't know. And then the other stuff.
Barbed ones.
Sorry?
The barbed ones are a pain in the ass.
I've got a barbed one because I was given it, but I pretty much only use the ones which take the John Guest fittings because they're just easier to put together, take apart. I've not had a John Guest fitting failure yet, but again, I've heard of it. The problem I find is like you put that onto the barb, and then beer line is actually quite stiff. here's your sort of typical 3/8 of inch beer line. By the time that I've shoved that all the way in, it's not coming out without me almost cutting it off generally, which is kind of the point. But also, if you want to muck around with stuff, move things around, putting it onto one of the John Guest fittings, so got one here, you can just take the thing off pretty straightforward, put it back on. That's a really tight seal, so that's why I tend to use those. Gas line, there are 2 or 3 options. Oh, sorry, gas and beer line, I would use the same thing. Again, it's kind of worth buying the half decent stuff here because there's various levels of permeability. The sort of Valpar, Brewmaster and Gen X stuff seems to be fairly good quality. You're not going to save a lot by buying cheaper, but it does seem to have an effect on the sort of beer in the line getting oxidized. So between pours, if you leave it for a day or 2 or even a week, the beer that's left in the line will be in better shape if you've got a better quality beer line at the end. There's options in terms of sizes. This is the 3/8 of an inch beer line. There's also 3/16, which is a lot narrower gauge. You see the 2 together there. I'll talk about the differences between those in a minute, but generally I tend to use 3/8 of an inch for the gas side and 3/16 for the actual serving for the liquid side. The last bits you need is a tap. I've not got anything more fancy at the moment than the old Cobra picnic tap, whatever you want to call it, party tap. Basic as anything, but I've not really had any issues with anything. It's very easy to clean. Cost all about £2, and I've served 3.5 volume saison through it without any real issues. So obviously, if you want to have something that's mounted onto the outside of a Keezer or kegerator, then you're going to need a fancier tap. I've not gone there yet, but I'm going to be building a Keezer fairly soon, so maybe I'll buy some fancy taps to put on there instead.
I think you can get those fancy taps even with the flow regulator, just over £20 from AliExpress.
Yeah. If you're using the 3/16 line, though, you really don't need it.
Yeah, I'll get to that in a couple of slides' time, actually. Be an interesting discussion, but because I've got the other thing, which is a flow control disconnect. I'll talk about my experience with that. So in terms of then when you've got everything set up, first thing you're going to use it for potentially is for forced carbonating a beer. So first of all, how do you do that? What you need to do is use a chart to figure that out. Let me see if I can just bring an example one up. This is the one I tend to use. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah.
So you basically need to, you look along the top for the volumes of CO2 you want in there. Look at the temperature that you've got it at down the side, and that will tell you what pressure to dial in on your regulator. Easy as that, really. I haven't found any sort of difficulty doing it. One thing I have found is that when I want to start carbonation before the beer is fully chilled, this is actually also pretty accurate even at the higher temperatures. I'll talk about spunding and things like that in a bit as well. I found that, yeah, even when I'm at fermentation temperatures and have sealed it up before the end of fermentation, or I've primed the keg with some sugar at fermentation temperature, I can dial in 25 psi at 17 degrees and I will get my beer pretty much carbonated. So that's another way of doing it as well.
Does that chart give you an idea about how long it takes for it to happen?
So if you just set it, so there's different ways of doing there. You can just set it and walk away. And it depends really upon a number of things. It's down to, first of all, the level of the pressure that you've got on there. If you just want to set it at the serving pressure, it's going to take a while, potentially a week or 2. I would say certainly at least a week. Frankly, I've never done that because I'm too impatient. What I've always done is I'm either naturally priming, spooning, or doing one of the other methods of setting it up at sort of 35 psi for a couple of days. I've heard of people setting it to 50 psi and the beer being really nicely carbonated after a few hours. So that's getting fairly high level pressure in there, but hey,
if it works.
So yeah, I mean, another way of doing it is if you set a relatively high pressure and actually just rock the keg back and forth for 10 minutes or so, it will knock a lot of CO2 into the beer. So actually you can potentially carbonate a beer very quickly. I've seen other things. I think Blickman make a carbonator, a quick carb, which basically just pumps the beer through over the top of a diffusion stone, which is you connect your CO2 up to. So that's another way of working it. And I've seen some homebrew versions of that as well, where people have built their own.
Well, I've done the dirty trick of connecting the gas line to an outpost and then pumping the gas in the outpost as well to try and carbonate quickly. But I'm not sure that it was particularly successful with it. It was something I was trying to do.
I mean,
you can get those carbonation stones as well, can't you? So you can use the in post with a tube on it with a stone on the bottom.
Yeah,
in fact, I think you can get some fancy lids for the kegs that have an extra post on them, so you can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got one from Angel Homebrew. It was 20 quid, and it's got a carbonation stone built into it.
Does it actually work?
Does it work?
It works great.
Built into what? Sorry.
It's got a gas impost on top of the lid, and then a little tube with a carbonation stone at the end of it.
So how far down into the beer does it? So you have to have the beer up to a certain level.
Yeah, it goes about halfway down the keg.
I mean, I think one of the things that affects how fast it carbonates is the actual surface area of the beer that's exposed to got. So obviously, if you've only got a very small amount in the top of the beer, then there's not a lot there. Not a lot of space in the top of the keg.
Yeah, it's the same surface area.
So you can do things like if you sit it on its side, or if you're shaking it and moving it, it speeds things up a lot. I've always been skeptical about those carbonation stones, actually, just for that reason, and that once you've done the initial squirt of CO2 into there, how much more surface area is it actually introducing?
Well, the whole point is you're producing like micrometer bubbles, and they have massive surface area.
Yeah, the number those bubbles, those tiny little bubbles, will have a huge surface area.
But once the liquid and gas have all equalized pressure with what you're putting on top of it, will it actually continue to produce bubbles anymore?
I think it does it so fast. I mean, I think that's possibly the point, that you're doing it in minutes, really, I gather.
I know that's what the quick carb stuff uses, and that it's basically pumping over the top of one of those. So it's moving the beer across it, so it's continuously diffusing into that. So I can see that working.
The other thing is the temperature, of course, isn't it? Because your dissolved oxygen, as you showed in that chart, is entirely dependent on temperature. Yeah. So presumably, if you're carbing at a lower temperature, you can push more CO2 into that liquid than you can at a higher temperature.
The danger of all of this, of speeding it up rather than just setting it and forgetting it, is that you end up over-carbonating things. I've managed to do that as well by basically sealing up the keg too soon, and then coming back a few days later and finding the keg had actually around, I think it was 45 psi. Don't do that. It took a little while to decarbonate the beer after doing that, by basically just what I actually did was attach it's one of the gadgets you can use for the carbonation, a spunding valve. Well, basically you attach this to the gas post, seal up your keg, and then you can use the knob here to set this as essentially a very slow pressure release. So it brings you down to a set pressure and keeps it there. So every time the pressure goes up, it will just release a little bit more gas. So I use that for decarbonating, but obviously as well, you can use it for the actual carbonation, either by sealing up your beer before it's finished fermenting and setting the pressure on here. You can use it for natural carbonation as well. And there's a few other, you can use it as well for things like keg transfers as well for slowly releasing pressure whilst maintaining a level of pressure in a keg. There's a couple of different kinds of these. I bought, this is the one you'll see around a bit more, which is sort of made of various bits of brass. And I found it was absolutely rubbish.
Yeah,
one of the reasons why is
the crap.
because it only goes up to 15 psi, which is not really enough if you're actually trying to carbonate something at fermentation temperature. So why is whoever designed this thought that was a good level of pressure to be able to read on that? I don't know. So yeah, the other side of it is that you can see all the joints on it are all PTFE taped up. It was leaking when I got it. And I found actually one of the joints wasn't properly taped, so I fixed that. And then even then, to be honest, the other problem with these is that there's a sort of poppet valve in the end of this, which it will basically, you set it at a pressure and it will seat. Then when the pressure builds, it will pop it open again, which is what it's supposed to do, but then it doesn't actually reseal at the same pressure that it opened at. So I found actually it was a bit all over the place. This thing, you see it called a blow tie from Kegland. You'll find them very cheaply on AliExpress if you want it. But this is much better. The gauge goes all the way up to 40 psi, and yeah, I'm really impressed with this actually.
I've got one of those, and they are brilliant. Yeah, the diaphragm valve in that is much better than that poppet arrangement. Which yeah, and if you get rubbish in it, say if you get beer going through it, it sticks. Whereas the diaphragm you can clean out.
Yeah, I managed to launch some beer through it a few weeks ago and flushed it through, and it's fine. So easily done. So yeah.
James, could I just say something about, step back a couple of steps about hooking up kegs and leaving them on for a couple of days. I used to do that, and came across, if I had several kegs being carbonated by the same canister, and you've got a leak somewhere. I think I've emptied a couple of CO2 canisters in a couple of days by having a leak.
Yeah.
I mentioned this to, is he still here? Is Ian Cozier here? Because he mentioned to me, hello. This is your trick, Ian.
Hello, Ian.
Instead of doing that, so have your keg at say 2 degrees or 3 degrees, something like that, and then clamp the gas disconnect on at 40 psi, give it a burst for maybe 20 or 30 seconds, and take it off.
Yep.
Leave it for 12 hours, let it carbonate, let it dissolve into the liquid, and then come back again and do another 30 seconds, and it can tell you what, it saves you 36 quid plus free delivery.
Yeah, I do the same thing because my keg is currently in, I've got a single fridge which uses fermentation and for storing the keg in for actually drinking from, and I haven't drilled holes in it, so I do the same thing. I stick it on 30 psi. I'll actually put this on so I can see what the pressure is in the keg at that time. Come back and top it up until it starts to get to where I actually want it to be.
Exactly
there. So
yeah, I found it really reliable and a great trick. Thanks, Ian.
Yeah.
One other little thing on that trick you can do is if you leave the gas disconnect connected, you just open the gas canister every now and then. I find for the first 24 hours you can come back every couple of hours, and it just eats the pressure obviously going into the keg. But if the pressure dies down after about a few hours, if the pressure dies down to somewhere near zero, you've got a keg leak.
Yep.
And if the pressure stabilizes at about 10 or so and doesn't drain off, you know you've got a good keg seal. So it's quite a good way of telling whether you've got an issue with a post or before, whilst the beer is in a stable state, before you stick it away somewhere.
It's a good way of troubleshooting actually leaks in general. Is basically pressurize the system, turn off the gas, and then see if the gauge starts to drop. And you can basically then just gradually take off the kegs one by one until you figure out where it's leaking from. Because you can just see that pressure dropping over time. You only need to leave it sort of 15 minutes or so, and you'll see a change if there is a leak somewhere in the system.
And that's where the spunding valve comes in. The valve you were just showing, that comes into its own then as well. Checking a keg for any leaks, you can just bang that on there and see whether it's maintaining roughly a pressure at all.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about it in a little bit, but I tend to also, once I'm done cleaning my kegs, I'll actually store them with some pressure in them. So I know that when I come back to it, if it's got pressure in it, then that is fine. And also know I've sanitized it before then as well. Whereas if it's not got pressure in it, then I know there's probably a leak in it, or I haven't cleaned it, is the other option. So I'll get to that a little bit though as well. So we're going to talk about pouring beer. Rob has already mentioned about foaming. So the possibilities there when it comes to having a foamy beer is there's a possibility that your beer is overcarbonated, or it's just simply too warm. That could either be where it's being kept warm, or it's going through a warm line or a warm tap. Any of those things can cause the carbonation to pop out and just give you a glass full of foam. More common seems to be the problem with actual beer line lengths. Now, this is one of the things where I think I've noticed something a few months ago that there are online beer line length calculators, but they all use the American sizing of beer line. And I suddenly noticed a while ago that Americans measure their beer line by the internal diameter, whereas the stuff that I was buying was measured by the internal diameter.
External.
Sorry, yes, external diameter is the stuff I was buying. So our 3/8 inch line or 3/16 inch line is actually smaller than the American versions. So those calculators will give you slightly wonky numbers. I think actually the 3/16 line is actually more like 2/16. It's very narrow, and it tends to be that I don't think that stuff's actually sold in the USA either. So that's the one thing. Other than that, really, I found that the stuff to pour through is this the 3/16 line. Anything from 120 to about 100. I think this line is about 180 centimeters, and I sized it for that because I was pouring. I think it was a 3.5 volumes of CO2 saison through it, and it pours it absolutely fine. So 180 centimeters of this is going to pour anything. Lower carbonation, lower pressure beers are obviously going to pour a bit slowly, so you can wind that down. The other thing is that I've got this flow control disconnect on the end. So it's a disconnect, but it's got a little knob on the top, which pushes down the poppet on top to give more resistance, to help reduce the pressure, or to help increase the pressure on it. So the idea is eventually I'll shorten up this line slightly, and then you just sort of twiddle the knob to actually dial in the actual flow that you want. You can get fancy flow control taps as well. I think, to be honest, once you've got if you just play around with a 3/16 inch beer line, you should be able to pour anything normally anyway, even through a crummy picnic tap. And those flow control devices, for me, are more a final adjustment to get you sort of, if you're pouring a bit slowly, you can open it up to pour a bit faster, or vice versa. But you're not going to solve major foaming issues with them. Any thoughts on that? I mean, that's my observation. But
what temperature are you serving? You said you got a fridge, so what temperature are you serving this at?
Normally around 5 or 6 degrees.
Right. Because that's the only problem I've ever had, because I've given my fridges up to fermenting, and I've got a beer cooler, an inline beer cooler. It's actually made by Cornelius, but because of using that, then the beer comes out of the keg warm, then goes into the cooler, and then comes out. I'm using 3/16, and I still find that it's pouring a bit foamy.
Yeah.
Because I'm not keeping the actual keg in the fridge, so it's basically coming out of the keg warm, and so it's got to have a certain length of line where presumably CO2 is coming out of suspension into the line. So I have a little bit of a problem with that. Yeah. But you're serving at what, 560? Did you say?
5 to 6 degrees, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I tend to carbonate my beer a bit higher. I said I'm doing saisons and things like that through it, which tend to want to serve a bit colder and with a bit more carbonation in them.
Right.
So that's why I tend to serve around that. So I would generally recommend using that line. And the other good thing about it is that, it's nice and flexible.
Yes.
Makes serving it easy. This 3/8 inch line is really not very flexible. So if it's good for the sort of stuff where you're not going to be moving it around, and in which case if you need to move it around corners and things like that, I would just put like a sort of John Guest elbow or something like that in there. But it's flexible, but only to a limited extent. And it tends to be sort of connected. If I let the gas line, if I take the disconnect off and not careful where I'm putting it, it tends to ping around and knock things over.
Have you tried the Kegland stuff? Because they do a beer line that's meant to be. Because I noticed a lot of the thing about the blow tie that you've got, the sponging valve, that presumably comes from Kegland or AliExpress, same lot.
I don't. I mean, I tend to use the Valpar line that the Malt Miller stocks.
It was just only because people were commenting on it being more flexible. That was all. And I tried it.
I haven't really thought about it too much, to be honest. It was more around the making sure the line's good quality and not permeable.
Yeah,
that's my main concern. So
if I can only make a note about that flow control hose. I think they're almost impossible to get right now.
Okay.
I was trying to buy one over the last couple of months, and it's out of stock everywhere.
I wouldn't bother.
No?
Honestly, I'll sell you mine. I would buy the 3/16 line and trim it, and maybe have 2 or 3 lengths for different beers.
They're quite expensive, aren't they?
Yeah. I bought one because I think it would be ideal, but I wouldn't bother.
It's another thing to have to clean as well. You know, take apart. I mean, that's what I noticed with that. I mean, I've got a flow control tap for the beer line, and it's a lot more hassle to clean than if you just, as you say, just getting the beer line right. Because everyone's situation is different. If your beer's lower than where you're serving it, will make a difference, I think. And
the extra height adds back pressure where the tap is. So
I gather most people do it by just trial and error. You get a piece of tube, you trim it. How much is a piece of tube? Next to nothing. So you just trim it to the right length you find just right for serving your beer. If you mess up, get some more tube and leave it longer.
You can clean your lines, or ideally you want to throw the stuff away occasionally. But I've heard of people that throw away every single beer because it's
throw what away?
The beer line.
What?
Serving line. Yeah. It's cheap. But
it's like those people who pour away. You see these sites where people talk about pouring away the first God knows how many ounces of beer from the keg because it's just a new keg.
It keeps you regular.
But it would kill me to do that.
That's bonkers.
So speaking of cleaning and general maintenance, it's not just all those other bits you need. You're going to need a few other things as well. I find like I've got a very cheap set of adjustable spanners to deal with all the various different sizes of things you're going to deal with. Actually, for the actual keg posts, I tend to use a socket wrench. This is a big, I think it's 3/4 of an inch one. 7/8 of an inch one for the big keg posts.
Wow, James.
Yep.
a lot of people might not have that one there. Is it 22 mil?
It's imperial. It's 7/8 inch.
They are hard to get hold of, those, but eBay, they turn up. They are quite difficult to get hold of the 7/8.
So you'll find that kegs, there's a couple of different sizes on the post. So this one fits on the bigger size, which is the sort of traditional one. So it fits on there, nice and easy to take off. There is also, if you're buying cheap replacement posts, you'll find there's a slightly smaller one, which is about 16.5 mil. So slightly smaller. So yeah, you need a different size socket for that. But they tend to be a bit cheaper and they fit on the same threads. So yeah, I would recommend getting some adjustable spanners to deal with all the various different sizes of things you're going to deal with. Some silicone grease, food safe. The reason I would suggest that is for all the various rubber seals that you're going to deal with on a corny keg. If they're well lubed up, they will seat better, they will last longer, and they'll fail less regularly through getting cut. So a tiny bit of silicone grease on them each time you clean the keg will help. There's a lot of seals on these corny kegs. I think there's 8 in total. Think about the lid, pressure release valve, and then each post has 3 separate rubber seals essentially on it. There's one around the top of the post here, which is what the disconnect locks onto. And then inside the post, there is the poppet, which has got a little seal on the end of it. And then underneath the actual post itself, you'll find on the dip tubes, there's another seal. So I'd really recommend buying a spares kit. I've seen some around on eBay, and again on the Malt Miller sells a spares kit which has everything, including replacement posts. I would recommend buying one of those before you ever need it, because inevitably you need it just as you're trying to put beer into a keg or take it out and you found there's a leak. So it's one of those things, if it's not convenient really to have to wait, you're better off getting the spares up front. I would suggest even extending that to posts, poppets, even the disconnects, because they actually have their own little, inside these, there's actually, if you take the top off of here, you'll find there's a poppet valve inside that as well, which has got its own little rubber seal. And those do leak on occasion as well if they're not, if they get sort of seated badly, they can end up getting squished out of place. You get a little cut in the seal, and then they'll start leaking.
Or you can flush them down the sink.
Yes.
How do I know that? Yeah. I have found compatibility issues with poppets. I bought, when I first got some kegs, I think mine are Firestone Walker kegs, Firestone kegs. I bought some poppets because one of them was a bit perished and it didn't fit. So I switched it back to the one that was the original one and made do.
So these old, the sort of original ones you'll get, you'll see inside the post, the poppet is in there and it's sort of squished into place, and it's actually, I don't think this, I can get this one out. This little thing, like that.
Those are the ones, yep.
And they are really expensive to buy on their own. At least they are here. The ones you'll find that are cheap are these ones, which are kind of universal poppets. But they tend to only fit inside the sort of universal post replacements you can buy. But given that a set of poppets is like £3 or something like that, and then these posts are £3 or £4, they fit on the same thread for just fine. I think this one should fit straight onto, a bit tight because I've got the spring on there, but that will go straight on. If I've got the same thread size, that is. Come on. Or not. It might have a slightly different thread size. There's 2 different thread sizes for these. I think it's 19, 30, 32 of an inch, and then 9/16 or something like that. But it's worth having spares around just in case. The other stuff I would have would be some quality cleaning solution. I'm a big fan of PBW, or the stuff now. You can't buy PBW here. The Kegland and I think it's Chem Clean is the other one. It's basically the same stuff. You can basically, the way I clean a keg is I will rinse it out with water when I'm done with it, and including running a bit through the liquid post and the beer line, just to flush it through. I'll take the liquid post off to check there's no hop or any other gunk in there. Then put it back on, a couple of spoons of cleaning solution with about a couple of kettles worth of water. Close it up, give it a shake, leave it to soak, give it another shake occasionally, and then empty it out via the beer line that you're trying to clean. Then finally rinse it, sanitize it, seal it with a little pressure for storage. That's all about you need to do. Doesn't take very long at all. So yeah, that's how I like to clean stuff.
Just one thing I'll add to what you're saying there, James. When you're cleaning it, clean it with the lines on, so that you can basically soak the lines in the fluid as well, and the vacuum will hold the cleaning fluid in the lines. So that does a sort of a 2-in-1 job.
I have just managed to put that post on there as well, so you see it does fit properly. I think most of the kegs you'll find in this country should be all the same thread sizes. So as I said earlier on, there's the John Deere and Firestone kegs can occasionally have weird thread sizes where you can't replace the posts anymore. So is there anything to worry about? And the only other stuff I would like, the only other gadgets I really like are these carbonator caps. So we were talking earlier on in the meeting about PET bottles, and these screw straight onto the top of a PET bottle. And so originally the intention was you put beer in them, screw this on the top, put your gas straight onto here, and push carbon dioxide into it, so you can rapidly carbonate by shaking the bottle. Since then, I think they've moved on, so you can now fit gas or liquid posts onto these. So the way I use them is, there's many different ways I use them. First of all, if I'm coming to, for example, to a meeting, I can use it as a counter pressure filler. So I'll screw this onto a PET bottle, put gas into here to pressurize the bottle, then put the beer line off of the keg straight onto here. And basically then, if you gradually ease off this carbonated cap off the bottle, it'll let a bit of pressure out and gradually fill the bottle up without any foaming. And then obviously when you're done, just tighten up, all done. So that's one way you can use it. You can use it for cleaning lines and things like that. Again, screw it onto a PET bottle, put some cleaner into the bottle, and then just squeeze the bottle, and you can push it through any line. There are so many different ways of using these. I think they're quite useful. I mean, they've got a barb on the end, so you can create a dip tube, or you can put two together to create sort of a disconnect to disconnect connector. Yeah, I have several of these because they're just really, really useful.
It's almost like there's a talk in themselves for using those things. They are very versatile.
They are. They're yeah, given they're very, very easy to use. So speaking of serving, so the other thing about is obviously most of the time you want to serve the beer straight out of your keg, but sometimes that's not convenient. You want to get it into a bottle. There are different ways of doing that. So there are a few different options. The difficulty with putting it, you can pour straight into a bottle, but you'll get a lot of foam usually, unless you've got quite skilled at pouring. So the options really for filling a bottle otherwise are you can get a counter pressure filler, which will partially pressurize the bottle and then fill against that pressure to stop foaming. I have one of those here. You got a beer gun?
Got there? Let me see. You bought one then? You took the plunge?
Oh yeah. Oh, I bought this quite a while ago. Yeah. So the trick thing about this one is So this has like an attachment to go back to the actual beer line. And there's a little button here which you press down. Basically, you connect the gas onto this side. You press this little button down here to let some CO2 in through to pressurize the bottle. And then you open up the tap here, and the beer flows through, avoids foaming. You fill to the top of the bottle, take it off, and then quickly cap it before it foams too much. And you get really beautifully oxygen-free beers. I've been put sort of IPAs and things like that through recently, and it's been absolutely brilliant.
That works well.
Yeah, works really, really well.
And that is the when we look at these images here on the screen, is that the one in the middle?
This is the one on the left, the tap cooler. So it's the one which see this one here. So the thing that I've got an extra attachment here which can take you back to actually to the keg, to a postal on the keg. The one in the picture there is the way it normally comes, where this top bit comes off, and actually there's a piece which you put in there, and you can basically just jam it into a tap if you have one.
Yeah.
You lose all of this top assembly here.
If the tap's the right size.
Sorry?
If the tap is the right size, or
yes, it works. It's specific taps, but basically you can take the thing, stick it into a tap, stick your bottle on there, pour it, done. So I'm intending on doing that, but either way, I thought it works really well as a counter pressure filler. There is the one on the right here as well, which is you'll find them around quite cheaply. Again, there's lots of Chinese versions. And then the one in the middle is the beer gun, which is not a counter pressure filler. I've not used one. I believe it basically works by providing a lot of resistance up to the end of the line and then pouring very, very gently into the bottle.
We have one of those, and it works really well.
Sorry?
We have one of those, the Blickman beer gun. Our daughter got it in America, so it wasn't so expensive. It works really well.
It works well.
Yeah.
I've had a few of the ones on the right, the like AliExpress counter pressures, and they've all been terrible. Like, they all leak. You get beer coming through to the vent sort of thing. You can't clean them. Yeah, horrible.
Yeah, I've heard things about them because of the number of different joints in the thing. They don't, again, like they've not been properly sealed up and that sort of thing. So
they just vent gas from every connection, and it's impossible to clean. Yeah, they're reflections.
Honestly, if you want the really cheap way of doing it, it's one of these and PET bottles. Because this costs like £5. PET bottle you'll get for free from Coke or whatever, and this is a perfectly good counter pressure filler.
The Blickman beer gun, certainly their version you've got the picture there, the Mark II I think it is, that does work very well, but then it's quite an expensive piece of kit. And again, it depends how many bottles you're doing. It's only one stainless tube to actually clean thoroughly. The rest of it you have to soak and clean. But I find it's only worth doing if you're going to do quite a few bottles, because you've got to connect the gas line up, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. As Jerome said, I bought one years ago, and I do find it works really, really well. And I thought I would use it a lot more than I have, but it's really the whole setting the thing up, which is a pain in the arse, and getting all the gas pressure right and all that. And so now I just basically pretty much don't bother.
I mean, I got my beer gun as an answer to some of the bottling woes, and then I got kegs, and so I only bottle what I got left over from a 19-litre keg. I'm usually doing, say, 23, 24-litre batches. And it's just about worth doing for 10, 15, say 13, 15 bottles. But anything under that, and it's not worth it. You're better off.
I agree with that. I've got one as well. I keg, and then I kind of bottle on demand. So I'll hook it up if I'm going to do, as you say, 10 or 15 or more, or do a whole keg's worth. There are two triggers on it. There's one for the one that will purge the bottle with gas, and then you let go, and then you fill the bottle with beer. I found I can fill a bottle in about 15 seconds at about 5 psi, something like that.
Yeah.
So once you get in the swing of it, it's, you know, you've got your cold bottles here, you've got your very cold keg on the floor, got your beer gun ready, and your capper on the right hand side. This is how I do it anyway.
Yeah.
So empty the bottle into the thing, 15 seconds as it foams to the top, cap it, bang. You can get, you know, put some music on. It's quite therapeutic. It's like doing the ironing.
Yeah.
You can kind of get I can usually keg. I can do a whole keg in about 40 minutes, something like that.
Yeah. No, you're right. Once you get into the swing of it, it's just a doddle. You're just putting it one trigger, then the next one, 7 seconds or whatever, and then if you're being fussy, you can always sort of push a little bit of CO2 just on the top before capping it. So that.
Funny you should say that, Jerome. I did do a test exactly with that. I don't know if you're going to come onto it, James, but I did do a test exactly side by side of purging some bottles and not purging some bottles on a pale ale or something like that, whatever it was. Labeled them all up. Did like sort of 3 or 4 of each, so there was some redundancy built in. Made a definite difference. Definitely purging with a little bit of CO2. So probably, if anyone's familiar with this length of purging, which is about 2 seconds. I'm aware, of course, that when you're squirting a load of pressurized CO2 into the bottom of a air-filled bottle, that it swirls it all up, right? So it's never just pushing the air out and having a nice CO2 block behind it. The whole thing probably just.
In fact, I think it's the turbulence that helps, because I think when going back to the kegs, I don't know whether it's going to be mentioned about when filling kegs, purging the headspace and getting rid of the oxygen in the top of the keg by giving it a few blasts of CO2. Most of that is down apparently to the turbulence you caused, mixing the gases and then purging it, and then mixing the gases up and purging it.
I did find it made a definite difference.
Right.
Purging the bottle and not purging the bottle at all. A definite difference in flavour and aroma. You know, like a day or a week later with the bottle. Anyway.
We've already got a kegerator in place. The other option is one of the Pegas counter fillers. They're quite good. There's less setting up involved because it's always on the side of the kegerator.
Oh, right, them. Yeah. I've been intrigued by them. Yeah.
I use one of those, and if you've already got the ball ache of the gas set up, there it is. It's just like a beer tap, and you pull the handle back one way, you get CO2, and you pull the handle forward, and you get beer flow. And they work very well.
Shows your pool table too.
Before you move.
That is not good for kegging.
All right.
On the beer gun, has anyone tried replacing the beer line on it? I know that it's a slightly, I don't know whether this matters. Firstly, it's a very long piece of beer line, but secondly, it's sort of very thick walled.
It is, and it's very flexible as well.
I don't use it. Mine stayed in the case. I just connect up. I just use an adapter and a homemade silicone tube.
Your beer line then.
We've got the same stuff on this one as well. I don't know what it is. It feels like some kind of vinyl tubing.
The tubing on the beer gun is different from what I've seen anywhere else.
Yeah.
And it's, as Anthony says, it's thick lined,
very thin,
and it's very flexible. As to why you'd want to replace it in the first place, why would that be? Because
for me,
you
Mark,
want to know that you can get a replacement for it. I suppose.
Yeah, and for me, Mark, it's just I'm sort of thinking I use it for bottling for competitions mainly, and maybe a growler to come into lab. But I've always figured at some point this is going to get manky.
Yeah,
and
I
know
know exactly what you mean.
Well,
I've got the same worries.
I've had that too. Mine's getting a little bit manky, even though I try and soak it in PVW, blow it through with water, and then with star sand or something like that. Residue builds up in any of those pipes, any of those tubings, I think. And
I found that I think it's the beer, sorry, the gas line, the grey gas line fits perfectly on it anyway. So I've used that in the past before, mainly because I don't like using that type of tubing anyway. I'm surprised they used it.
It seems that the tubing they gave you with it seems absolutely wonderful when it's nice and clean. It is so. It's you can see what's going on, and you can see how clear things are when they're going through it, and shut off when things get a bit murky. It's immensely flexible.
Yeah.
I really, really like it, and I've used cut-offs for using on other things. To do with bottling and kegging and things like that. So my beer line is getting shorter and shorter, but one day it's gonna get too manky, and I'm gonna wonder about how I'm gonna clean it. I love my beer gun. I bought one about 5 years ago. I didn't use it much, but then in the last year or so, I found so many uses for it. I even use it as a tap. It just works out well.
It's one way of serving beer to people. Shoot them with beer. Yeah.
I tell you what, it's really impressive. Here's my beer gun. I'm going to shoot you some beer. They love it.
What, do they hold their mouths open at 20 paces or something?
Yeah.
You only have to
hold it open at 2 meters.
Right. Okay, so I'll come back to a couple of things in a bit, but I was going to talk as well about what other funky things can you do with kegs. So I've used it as a fermenter. If you think about it, it's a pressure capable stainless steel vessel. You can use it as a keg. As a fermenter if you want to. You can see what I've done on the picture there. That's my fermentation fridge. I basically just removed the poppet from a post, stuck some silicone tubing over it, and then that's put it into a jar for blow off and sort of airlock. There's different things you can use it for. It's a good way of, you can basically get everything or ferment in the keg and then do a transfer to another keg to avoid oxidation. I've seen people doing warm lager fermentations, so pressurizing it. I've not done that myself yet, but I hear positive things about it.
What's that? Sorry, James?
I've heard of people basically doing warm lager fermentation. So they will pressurize the keg and ferment in there with a lager yeast, but they'll do it at like 19 degrees. But because of the pressure, it reduces ester formation. So it gives you a sort of a turbo lager. It's a possible option.
I think Steve did experiment with that, and he made some high pressure lagers.
Yeah, he's got
Steve who? Smithy?
Me, hello.
Yeah.
I haven't done it in a keg. I've got a fermentosaurus, but that does lager at room temperature under 15 psi, 1 bar.
Quite low.
Yeah, it keeps this literally is what I'm drinking right now.
Right. How is it?
That's a Czech Pils done under 15 psi of pressure, not in a keg, but in a fermentosaurus, but same deal at room temperature. Fine. It's fine.
Ooh.
So like no esters, keeps the esters right out. Anyway.
if you're going to do this, then
they're great for that under pressure. Really good, works really well.
If you're going to do it, then obviously you can't get up to the full volume in here. You can get pretty close if you use some anti-foam. But if you're using a big top cropping yeast like a wheat yeast or a vice yeast, I find that I end up creating massive corrosions. I wouldn't do that in here because you would just end up gunking up the posts or something like that. As I said, for a blow off, I will take off the gas post, take out the poppet, and then jam a bit of silicone tubing over the top of it to create a blow off. The other thing, if you're going to do that, and you then want to do a keg to keg transfer, you will probably want to have, modify the dip tube in some way to avoid getting the picking up all of the yeast and trub on the bottom. So there's some people will say you cut your dip tube. I wouldn't do that because they're very hard to replace. Occasionally
you can simply stick a bit of silicone tubing over the end.
Yep. I was going to say if you can use silicone tubing or some bits of beer line and actually on the end of a regular dip tube and actually create it as a U so it sort of sticks up above the bottom a little bit. And what I've got is a floating dip tube. So it's a bit of silicone hose, a little float on the end here. So it floats at the top of the beer and draws off of there. So that's replaced my liquid dip tube essentially. And I've actually just put a replacement gas dip tube on the liquid side.
Do you get, how much do you get left in the bottom of the keg using one of those?
Next to nothing.
Right.
It sits, if you cut this length right, although because basically the float sits on the top and you can see the actual end of it sits below.
Yeah.
So this will drop all the way to the bottom and suck up virtually everything in there.
Oh, nice. That means you're drawing from the top rather than the bottom.
Yes.
So, so it's the clearer beer as well.
Yes. So the two things that these work for. One is for if you want to ferment in there. The other side is if you want to condition faster. Use this. You're drawing from the top. So if you've got kegs loose in there or anything else, you're drawing from the top straight away. You get clear beer straight away.
So if you're dry hopping in the keg as well, then you're not picking up any crap from here. Yeah.
I ferment in here, dry hop loose in here, cold crash it down for a couple of days, and then this will you'll get a tiny bit of hop through initially, but then you'll get clear all the way until it gets to the bottom, and you start to pick up yeast and hops.
Yeah. What is that gadget there that you look? Can you tell me what it is? So,
it's just called like I can't remember. It's like the Fermentosaurus float or something like that. If you just look up floating dip tube,
floating dip tube, I think it's called.
Oh, that sounds expensive. How much
is it?
No,
it's like 10 quid or something like that.
7 quid, I think, from AliExpress.
Yeah, way cheaper from AliExpress.
I prefer the 7 quid option.
No, they're very cheap. About 7 quid or something. I mean, there is a post of someone making their own by just buying length for silicone tubing and a float valve, a stainless steel float valve for liquid level sensors. But you might as well buy one of those. Because
if anybody remembers the old King kegs that you used to be able to get, you probably still can get that had those floating handcuffs.
A wedge.
I've got loads of them.
I was going to say there's other options. There's like the cask wedge. Is the other thing. A plastic version of that. I like those ones because it's stainless steel, and then I've got silicone tubing on it, so I can just boil the whole thing, and I know it's sanitary.
Yeah.
So those work really well, and they work well for serving faster as well.
So they're worth getting, are they? Those?
I think so. I mean, it's another gadget. I mean, one of the things is like,
I like gadgets.
I'll say like corny kegs are cheap because you can buy them for 40 quid, but then you end up spending £200 in accessories for it all.
Yeah. Well, that's like brewing, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's one of the joys of it all. I like all the gadgets.
The only thing to bear in mind with those, and also even with the keg-to-keg transfers, is mine was slowing down the other day, and I opened up the top of my black disco that I used.
Got there, Richard.
And it was full of hop gunk and all sorts of nasty stuff. So it's worth cleaning them out. The ones you use for anything like that on a regular basis.
The black disco, you can basically twist the little, put a coin or a screwdriver in the end of this, twist it open. You can pop it all open, clean it all out, and you'll find if there's any rubbish in there. Same for the actual posts. Check the poppets, because you don't want a bunch of hop stuck in there and sticking the whole thing up for future use. So, all right. So I think this will be my. Oh, I've got one more slide after this, but so we're nearly done.
I can't read that. Well,
Sorry?
I need to move my window, the pictures out of the way.
It's because you're drunk.
Yeah, you're right.
So if you're going to do this and you want to do a keg-to-keg transfer, this is a similar theory to sort of counter pressure filling. So first of all, if what you do is you purge the keg that you're going to transfer to. So this is in the case where you're, say, fermenting in one keg, you want to move it to a serving keg, so you're going to have clear beer. First thing you do is the serving keg, you need to purge that completely. So ideally, I would say, particularly if you're serving very hoppy beers, you want to avoid oxidation, fill the whole thing up with sanitizer and then blow it all out with CO2. So then you know you've got 100% CO2 filled keg, nothing else in it. You then pressurize that up to the pressure that that you're going to be transferring at. In this case, I can actually if you pressurize it up enough, you can actually carbonate in the fermenting keg. So if you've done any spunding, and then transfer across as a counter pressure filler to the serving keg. So you pressurize the empty keg, put the gas on the fermenter, create basically build a jumper line to go between two black disconnects. So you can see that in the middle between the two kegs in the picture there. So you're filling liquid post to liquid post. And then on the gas side of the receiving keg, you can either just pull the pressure release valve to reduce the pressure in there, at which point beer will start flowing, or again, use the spunding valve to gradually reduce pressure, and you'll see the beer start to flow. Obviously, at this point, you can see stuff going through the tubing, but what's going through there, how fast it's moving, is a bit difficult to see. So the simplest thing there to do is to get some platform scales, and you can actually then see the progress of what you're doing, how fast it's flowing, or if it's stalled. Those scales are really useful anyway, because it's a quick way of telling how much is in your keg. So once if you're not sure whether you're about to run out of beer or not, you can stick it on the scales, take off the weight of the keg, which from memory is about 3.5 kilos, I think. And that tells you how much beer is left in there. So really straightforward.
Where did you get those scales from? Because I've had bad luck with getting...
eBay, I think. It was eBay or Amazon. I think they were about £20.
Rob, don't you have the Plato keg scale?
I do. How do you know I have a Plato keg scale? Yeah, I do. Yeah, and that's quite useful. But like, you can't move it from keg to keg.
Okay. Yeah.
So it stays in one place.
I picked up a £7 analog one from Argos, because I found that the digital ones won't respond as the thing gets fuller. But obviously with a spring one, you can see it go from, I think something like 3.5 or 4 kilos for an empty keg up to 22.
I'll try and post on the Slack the one that I bought, but that one works really well.
Yeah.
I got a really nice mechanical one, like Steve says, like a spring one, but I've spilt so much beer on it now that it must have gunked up inside. It's just, and it goes like that.
I'm hovering. The other trick I do is hover over it when it gets to about 20 kilos and keep like tapping it with my hand like a cat trying to knock stuff off the table. So that it resets it's resetting itself like every few seconds.
Yeah.
Because I find that it's not responding the entire time. And when it gets too full and it fills up to the bottom of the gas tube, then that's when I'm pointing, that's when it spurts into your spunding valve setup. Yeah. And that's what you don't want.
Yeah.
You want to stop it just before it's maybe 2 centimeters below the dip tube, the gas dip tube.
You can also buy check valves, which are about £8, I think, and they screw onto the disconnect. I don't have one here, but they screw on between the disconnect and the John Guest fitting, and they will stop liquid going up there.
Well, the little the ball on with the ball in a little tube.
Oh, there's that thing as well. Another Kegland thing.
Yeah, the Kegland lot. They do a flow stopper, I think it's called, which is you connect that to your gas, so the gas post, and it's got a little plastic ball, which when it fills up, it pushes the plastic ball to stop the flow. So But having said that, it's probably because I always keg from rather than keg to keg because it's always cold. You can see the condensation line on the outside of the keg anyway, because I'm often when I'm filling from a fermentation vessel, because I've done a cold crash, then you can see the level of the beer within seconds as a condensation line on the outside of the keg.
I find there's a slight condensation lag. I'm going to call
there is. But once you fill enough kegs, you get you get attuned to it. Like
once I'd ruined a couple of spunding valves, then
yeah.
What's wrong with opening the lid and having a look?
Oh, oxygen! Oxygen!
No. What you're doing is you are pushing out a carbon dioxide filled vessel as you're putting liquid in there. So where's this oxygen coming from?
I mean, I would say, like, if I've been to all the effort to try and avoid oxidation at every step here, I'm not going to open the lid at that point.
Yeah.
The side is in this case. Hang on. Let me finish. Yeah. On the other side as well, and in this picture that I've got up there, the keg that I'm pushing from is already carbonated because I've been spunding in that already. So I can't open up the lid at that point because, well, the lid is sealed.
Well, you're venting the pressure, aren't you? So you can't not. Once you open one of those, you're going to mess around with the pressure. Yeah.
If you're filling from the fermenter, one trick is to stick a bit of silicone pipe onto a grey disco and stick that on the gas out, and then just wedge the keg just so that it's at an angle, so that when you fill from the fermenter, the first thing that happens is it hits the grey, the gas out.
Yeah.
It's slightly on an angle, so it's like Steve said, it's about 1 centimetre below. Beer starts coming out of that line. You unclip the grey and then tip it right the keg up, and you are naturally 1 centimetre below, and with no scale.
What sort of angle are you talking about? Just out of interest.
I just stick a piece of inch thick plank, underneath one side of the keg. It doesn't do much.
Right, that's useful. Yeah, that's useful.
That's a good
yeah, that makes sense.
That's witch talk.
So, I mean, the only other thing I would say with kegs is if you're building yourself a keezer or a kegerator that can take multiple kegs, then why just stop at beer or cider or anything else?
Well, what else? Hold on, what else is there apart from?
Well, you can make your own carbonated soft drinks, infusions, or mixers.
You're losing me. You're losing me now.
There's recipes online for tonic water. There's even the Coca-Cola recipe or a version of Coca-Cola is available. So other things you can make. Or alternatively, I've heard of people making their own tonic water with gin in it. So they've got a ready-made keg of gin and tonic. And I mean, there one other one I wondered about was like if you're making like wine or wine kit or something like that, then you could make sparkling wine with it. But I haven't.
Elderflower champagne.
Just a random thought I had, but you don't necessarily need to just use it for that. So that was it, really.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
That was really good. So how many kegs have you got?
At the moment, I have.
Like to ask.
I have 3 kegs, albeit I can only use really one at a time because my fridge will only take that. It won't take 2 side by side. I'm planning to build a keezer that will take either 6 or 8.
Right. Because they do breed those things, those kegs. Yeah. You put two kegs together, and the next thing you know.
I think we've got 6 at the moment, but we're feeling that's not quite enough.
Well, no, but if you're doing the lagering, and then you've also got a keg with your star sand in it, your cleaning solution or whatever, and whatever, you do find that you've always got a use for an extra keg.
Yep. Yeah, you got aging, you got lagering, you got all kinds of things you could be doing with it. So
yeah.
I mean, it's the difference in size for a chest freezer between having like 6 and 8, or even 4 and 8, is not a lot. So and if I don't fill it with kegs, then it's still spare space for potentially refrigeration space for other stuff. So.
Well, yeah. If it's a refrigerator, you can keep your hops and whatever in it. Yeah.
I ran out of gas yesterday, just filling a keg up, but with not enough gas to seal the lid. I was like, shit. So I managed to do an oxygen-free transfer and push enough over. But yeah, literally the gas ran out right at that minute, but there was not enough to seal the lid. And I had another lager keg sitting elsewhere, so I did a gas to gas from the keg and
use the gas from the lager keg?
Yeah, from the lager keg to pressurize the lid to like 10 or 12 psi to seal the lid. So yeah, you need more than one, is all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
Very useful to have a keg full of gas somewhere.
Fizzy beer, yeah.
Fizzy beer. Who doesn't want fizzy beer lying around?
Well, hey guys, it's a bit of an extra to what James is doing, but
these are 20 litre.
20 litres.
Yeah.
And I'd show you the spear, but it's in the shed and my daughter is sleeping beside me.
2 seconds, I'll pop downstairs to the garage.
Here you go.
And show you one.
That's a 20 litre
spear.
That's a 20 litre. 20 litres. Oh right.
Yeah. Oh, good man. Good man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one is full of beer, and that just shows you how buff I am. But yeah, this is a Heineken one, which would be an S type. They all have their own types, and this is the coupler, which I'm not sure you can see it, but you can see there's a kind of a copper color on it.
Yeah.
That wasn't there when I got it.
Did you leave it to soak in PBW for over a day?
I think I left it soaking in star sand with something that had a lot of copper in it. So I basically electroplated my coupler. Yeah, it's. I thought that was a The other thing is, can you see what I got on them here?
Yeah, I can't imagine if I were to try to put myself in someone else's shoes. I can't imagine not being curious about it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So those are disconnects on a Sankey.
Yeah. And I use this very badly, and I didn't have a proper seal on the beer side of it. So when I force carbed, I turned 2 entire kegs into vapor of a very good beer. But other than that, these are okay.
No, they're not. Get those.
I've been trying to get some of them as well, and it's nigh on impossible to get ones that fit properly, or at least that's.
They look like carbonation caps.
Yeah. No, they're
very close.
Yeah, they are same principle, but yeah, they screw onto the Sankey couplers.
So I've got to ask, right? If you can get cornies relatively cheap, why use a Sankey?
Because I got the Sankeys free.
Right.
All 7 of them.
So there's cheap and there's free. I suppose that's another level, isn't it?
Yeah, I got the Sankeys because I thought I'd be able to sell a couple of commercial kegs, and now I just sit in the corner gathering dust.
I got some 50-litre Sankey kegs for about £55.
Yeah, I paid 45 for mine because Rich Lock
including-
did a bulk buy.
And so it was cheaper than getting a corny keg. Or then you say to yourself, well, how much is a corny keg? Yeah, it depends, because it's all second-hand stuff. If it's going to be new, you're going to pay 80 quid, aren't you? If it's second-hand, depending on how good it is, you're going to be talking between 30 and 45 pounds.
Yeah, and you may at that point need to replace all of the seals, the PRV.
Yeah.
So be careful of what you're buying second hand. If it's not been renovated and had those bits replaced, then it may end up costing you a bit more than you think.
It does also depend, I think, on what batch size you're doing. Because I use a grain father, then I'm doing, say, 23 litres, 19 litres goes in a corny neatly, 12 bottles or, say, 15 bottles left over, then it's a nice size. I think if your batch size is different, then corny might be not as appropriate or whatever. I also find that the corny is very convenient to take into parties. They're just about at that upper limit of this is now starting to, get a bit of effort carrying it up the stairs. So,
I tell you, bus drivers don't like it.
Corny kegs.
Corny kegs.
They
Bus
really
drivers
don't
do
like
not like corny kegs at all. They freak out.
Jerome, can I make a request, please?
Go on.
Can you turn on your lamp behind you?
The lamp?
Yeah, the fibre.
Yeah.
Oh, what that thing? Oh, what this?
Oh, what is it?
It's a fibre optic lamp, isn't it?
Oh, I thought it was plugged in. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, that's better.
There we go.
Nice.
That's much better. Thank you.
That's that better. Right, there we go.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
I'm mesmerised.
Yeah, indeed. I've got the lava lamp somewhere as well.
Oh, you'll never get rid of me.
And as for the projectors and oil wheels, but we'll have to leave that for another time.
Anyone else got any questions about kegging while we're on the subject?
Yeah, just one more. So you get these Sankey kegs for free or next to nothing. How much money have you then got to spend, like sorting out all the fittings?
Just couplers.
You can get John Guest fittings for about £3.
Right.
And they just screw onto basically the same bits that Richard had. You can get John Guest fittings that just screw onto those posts, and you just put in 3/8 line.
How much is the coupler?
The
20 quid.
Coupler, I got it 12 quid off of eBay.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, those do turn up on eBay pretty cheaply, the couplers.
How much is the keg washer?
I already had that.
Yeah, she's £30 an hour.
Actually, with the kegs, even cleaning the cornies, I've yet to have a problem with a corny keg being particularly dirty.
Yeah.
I mean, my cleaning regime is pretty similar to what was described, and I've never found any sort of horrible gunk in them or anything.
You will if you're fermenting one.
Yeah, I imagine you would. And I one I bought second hand had a bit of milkstone in it, which a bit of nitric acid and phosphoric soon removed. But I found them pretty bulletproof. A mate of mine hardly ever cleans his at all. He just fills them, empties them, fills them, empties them. Occasionally cleans the posts, and his beer's perfectly all right.
The number of people, there's a whole thread on Homebrew Talk about people basically just not even doing that. They literally just empty the keg and then refill it with something else. And they're like, their thing is like, well, it's not been opened, so it can't be contaminated.
Yeah, well, until something goes wrong, yeah. And a lot of these people do it for ages. I mean, the same thing with this mate. He's so constantly brewing that he's pretty well pouring the wort on a yeast cake or whatever occasionally, but otherwise he's just giving it a rinse out, getting on with the next brew. He's using similar yeast each time. And having watched the Lars talk yesterday about Norwegian farmhouse brewing and watching their techniques, you soon realise that sometimes perhaps one goes overboard in cleaning and attention to some details.
You say that though, but right, I use Sankey kegs, and I've had a couple of problems whereby I've thought I've been able to clean them out properly just by swishing around a little bit of PBW and water and chucking it out, and then I've had problems with my beer where it's caught an obvious infection. And then I've looked at the beer, the kegs inside what I thought were going to be cleaned, and they are not. When I get right in there with a mirror and have a good look around, and it's not as clean as I would. It's just not. It's not
right.
Clean.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the cause of the problems I've had with with a few batches, and I've had to throw them away after about a month because they've become infected.
Right.
So
I gotta go.
Sorry,
I've got to go. I'm afraid. So
thanks, James.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, James, great chat.
Yeah, what did I say?
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm very aware of using Sankey kegs and the cleanliness that needs to be applied to them.
I mean, surely you're getting into the realms of like having to use caustic to clean them here. I mean, I use caustic to clean out my plate chiller after every brew because it's the only thing that will definitely get it clean.
Well, not even then, Ken. I've used caustic soda and I've tried it, and then I've got into there and had a good look around, and I can still see there's residue. Yeah. And you have to think that we can magically swish some liquid around and it gets rid of stuff.
Yeah, I think sometimes you need some. Yeah, you need some mechanical action to.
It needs mechanical action.
Yeah.
And with the Sankey, I've got a very small hole for getting something in there, and I've got a peculiar brush with bends. Thank you. Which I can do that and try and scrub it, and then have a good look inside as well. And it's going to be no different with a corny keg, except that you can see a lot easier in a corny keg if there's any residue left behind.
And you can get your arm in there, just about.
Unless if you're Popeye. Rob, can you get your arm in a corny keg?
elbow.
I like the way all the Americans complain they can't get their arms into corny kegs. Constant.
I can get my arm up.
That's why you have kids.
That's what you got kids for. Yeah.
Stop it, everybody.
Kids and caustic soda.
Have you seen those things that you attach to a drill and they've got like chamois leather on the end? And
I've got one.
Yeah,
I've got one. I used it for cleaning the 25-litre demijohns. And I don't use it anymore. It's knackered. But
mine's knackered as well.
No.
Do they work?
They do until they get knackered.
It's knackered so easily.
Like all of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
What do they use commercially then? The pressure washer, like a pressure lamp.
It's basically...
Commercially, they don't even. The spears are intact, and they will inject up inside the spear, with some really nasty chemicals to clean it all out.
Caustic soda.
Yeah, we're not into that, are we?
Yeah.
In the case of Heineken, it's what was in the kegs in the first place.
Yeah, but they're gonna. It's the lowest common denominator effect, isn't it? What the hell are they going to expect is going to be in that keg, and what we're going to have to clean out?
And I think it's also the pressure they can use with the pumps when cleaning as well. Obviously, the commercial pumps would be able to press, basically to push the caustic at the much higher pressure than you probably can do at home.
Oh yeah, oh goodness me. What they do commercially is nothing like we could even contemplate at home. It is, and of course, there's been commercial deaths where they've not been as careful about their regime, and things are blasted out, and your spears have hit people and all that type of stuff. It's a different ball game, I think, for the commercial people, is it not? When it comes to cleaning.
Yeah, and replicating that as a home brewer is a little bit scary. I get around it because I only use the same kind of yeast in my beers. So if I'm a little bit careless about my cleaning, it's the same yeast that's going to try and eat the same beer. And it's not been a problem over several generations. I've only done a deep clean twice with my kegs, and you know, I'm getting away with it. I'm not saying it's good advice, but at some stage I'm going to have to look at a better cleaning regime. I do have a keg cleaner, a water butt pump, which I can put like a spray ball on it and just basically invert the keg over it. But it's not the same thing as what the commercial guys are doing, where they use chemicals that will just annihilate everything inside the keg. And I won't use that in my home. So I'm taking risks.
I'm not sure you're taking that much of a risk, because I do a similar thing myself. I mean, I don't strip down a keg every use. You know, it might be, say, if I've got a Cornelius keg, I might actually strip it down and clean it thoroughly, to take all the seals out and clean it once every 6 months.
Yeah.
That's about it. I mean, otherwise, putting some, I just use sodium percarbonate. I just put some of that in it, leave it to soak 24 hours, give it a good slosh round, push liquid through the in and out posts, and then put some star sand in it, and that's, you know, that's it.
I think there's a lot of benefit to brewing the same beer with the same culture again and again. Like I think someone said about like the Norwegian brewers, and Jerome, wasn't it? You said about the Norwegian brewers and their approach to cleanliness. Yeah. It does help that they make the same beer each time with the same culture, and they'll know when it goes wrong. But then everything is contaminated, but it's contaminated with your yeast. So,
yeah, and they seem to, you know, be quite happy with that, because they're not coming into contact. I mean, I think if you start doing, say, you're mixing your wild yeasts and stuff in with, say, you know, a commercially grown yeast and so on, you've probably got problems. But this goes back to this mate of mine who pretty well uses 2 or 3 standard yeasts all the time, same beer most times. He just, you know, deep cleaning is something he does once a year. You know, I'm amazed. You know, it's clean, but it's not stripped down, and you know, not every, you know, nook and cranny of you know.
But does he know that the use of the same yeast helps?
Oh yeah. He's aware that he's probably, because he's not doing different yeasts and so on. You know, I gather, not that I've done any, but using some of the more wild yeast, where you can get all sorts of cross-contamination problems, and but I'm just saying about the kegs. You know, it might put some people off to say, well, you've got to, you know, you've got to all these seals and all that sort of stuff. Well, I just bought 3 kegs from the homebrew company in Ireland, and initially I bought 3 reconditioned kegs from them, but I just went for their non-reconditioned one. All 3 kegs were perfectly good sealed, you know, really good, really well cleaned. Nothing was wrong with them. I had the spare bits and pieces if I needed to put new O-ring or seal on them. I just clean them all, pressurize them all up, and they're all fine. And as I say, you know, cleaning them, stripping them down once every 6 months is about all they're going to get.
Yeah, the homebrew company Ireland deal was actually particularly good for a long time.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I got free kegs from them a couple of weeks ago when they had a brief window when they were open again, and one was a Britvic, one was a genuine Cornelius, which I think are slightly better. You know, given the choice of going for kegs, if you can get a Cornelius rather than an AEB one, unless you're after the shorter height, because the AEB ones are a little bit shorter and fatter. The three I got were in really good nick. You know, they were lovely kegs.
I do strip them down every time, only because I just want to make them clean. So the way I do it is fill a keg half, take the lid off, the valve, the seal, take the liquid and the gas posts off, take the dip tubes out, and take the and unroll the rubber seal things. Put them in a bucket, and then I fill a keg half full of PBW, hot PBW, give it maybe an hour or something like that, and then where all the bits are in the bottom of the bucket, I just turn the entire keg upside down so it's upside down in the bucket.
Right, got you.
So it's cleaning then the bits plus the posts on the inside. And I think I do that only because early on, I didn't do it and found that it had all that kind of sugary, furry mold on some of the posts.
Right.
I had a few infections where I wasn't cleaning stuff properly. I think I just got in the habit of, it wasn't so much of a big deal to, while you're cleaning the inside. So I'm saving, you know, so I'm only cleaning it half and using half the amount of PBW. So I might as well clean all of the bits separately as well while I'm cleaning the top half, if you see what I mean, while it's inverted. And it only takes 5 minutes to like unscrew the bits, stick them all in a bucket, you know, put some hot PBW on it, and then just rinse them off I'm doing it in the bath, to be honest, with the shower thing. So just rinsing them off afterwards. I'm not naked in the bath, obviously.
Rinsing your bits in the bath.
You know, I mean, although, you know, PBW can clean everything.
Sting.
I think what I picked up,
but it seems to work all right.
You know, what I picked up with this cleaning stuff is that you get into a sort of a routine, or for something that it works, or you keep doing it, and you just keep doing it because that's what you sort of learned. I'd be fascinated to know which bits of my process where someone from the outside would say, there you might be introducing a bit of contamination, or that's a place where you're probably overdoing it. There's where you're going wrong because you're actually touching that with your fingers or something, whatever it happens to be. Because I'm a bit in the dark. I've touched wood. I've done 76 brews, and I haven't had one go off yet. I haven't had one go off through contamination. So I sort of just keep doing what I'm doing. You
might well have a good process there then. I mean,
but it's only, I wonder sometimes whether I might be spending too much time on something and perhaps not enough time on something else.
Well, it only goes one way and not the other way.
Yes.
Like, if you've had a bad infection, you like, I'm going to clean everything all the time. And it's like, now my beers are good. It's like, I'm not going to like row back on that. So now that is like religious to me now, that I have to do this every
I think that's right. That's what I had a dirty something, so it's not dirty anymore.
And I did 3 things and it worked. So I have to keep doing those 3 things. Like you're never going to like remove one to see if the other 2 work.
It's a lot like your love life.
You're absolutely right. I think Jerome's right. Maybe I might take a step back and really look at it and go, why am I bothering to do that? Is that where the problem was?
I mean, the one thing I read about star sand is when I first started using star sand, I somehow read somewhere that it should have a jolly good soak. So I leave bottles and caps, and if I was using a syringe to fill the bottles or whatever, I'd leave them for half an hour in the star sand. And then I subsequently read that it only takes a couple of minutes of wet contact with the star sand for it to take effect. So all this sort of soaking in the stuff was basically a waste of my time. And that what I should be more careful of is actually keeping it as close to wet, because once it dries out, it ceases to have its effect and that sort of thing. So you sometimes pick up a process and then realize that perhaps it's that might actually be not necessarily a waste of time, but there might be better things to do with one's life.
Drink a beer.
Drink beer.
Ooh. Ooh.
No, it's a good point. That's a good point, I think. And there's lots of parts of the process that would come under that microscope, I think. I mean, I read X amount of times that X amount of people had done this, so that's what I do and it's worked fine. But half of those might be pointless unless you really investigate them. And now we've all got time.
We have.